After an entire decade of Five Nights at Freddy's, there's a lot of lore to unpack that millions of theorists have tried to solve. Although, I think I've actually solved it all. Today is the 5th part of this mini-series where we're solving Five Nights at Freddy's Sister Location from 2016, including the biggest question: when in the timeline does Elizabeth Afton die? Real quick, I'm sorry this one took longer to come out. A lot happened in my personal life, but every video will still be out by the end of the year, ending with the big timeline movie releasing December 19th at 5 PM UTC. So please subscribe so you don't miss an upload, and for us to hit 300k before the end of the year, like the video and consider becoming a channel member if you enjoy. But in order to figure out which story I'm going to tell there, let's begin solving the timeline here. Although remember, as always, this is just a theory and my interpretation of the evidence. Even if you disagree, I hope it gives you something new to think about. So as we all know, we play as Mike for the 5th time, heading underground into a new establishment, Circus Babies Entertainment and Rentals, in order to complete various tasks throughout the building, while narrowly avoiding death from the new dangerous Funtime animatronics for 5 nights. These Funtime animatronics include Circus Baby, Ballora, Funtime Freddy, and Funtime Foxy, with Funtime Chica and Music Man, 2 characters we see in the following game with similar color palettes and trademarks, assumedly being part of select party packages or even a spin-off location, Funtime Chica specifically being part of the Chica's Party World package, as revealed in the source code leading up to the game, which is a quick side note. The other directory alongside her, CRM and Inst, people have theorized a lot about, but I personally believe it to simply stand for Crewman Instruction, which would be representing the HandUnit system, an integral part of the location as we'll go on to learn. But either way, the name of Chica's Party World is directly stolen from the 1970s restaurant that contained only Chica, as we learnt through Secret of the Mimic, which eventually got acquired by Fazbear Entertainment. But she also seems to be the out-of-service animatronic mentioned in the source code leading up to the game as well, which crafted out the Funtime schedules, since FNAF 6 shows us that Funtime Chica has a missing plate on her chest, aka she's broken, and that she's even in the Rare Finds auction catalogue, meaning she was indeed an out-of-service animatronic who got thrown out. This is why she was mentioned directly alongside the reveal of an out-of-service animatronic. But speaking of Fazbear Entertainment specifically though, and this whole operational expansion is not under their brand, and is instead under a separate subsidiary made by William on his own, titled Afton Robotics LLC. Which, to define simply, a subsidiary is basically a company that's under and therefore controlled by the parent company. Them being aligned like this means that not only can Afton Robotics still use the Freddy and Foxy characters officially, but Fazbear Entertainment can also use the Funtime characters where they please too, which we see within the logbook, FNAF 6, Help Wanted, etc. Although unknowingly to the rest of the company, these Funtimes aren't just normal performing animatronics by any means, as we learn throughout the game that they were instead specifically designed for William to capture children. We know this due to the fact that there's a very rare chance every time you start the game or enter a new room for one of 4 blueprints to appear on screen, detailing these capturing functions of the Funtimes. Funtime Freddy specifically stating it very directly, by having grouping coordination, parental tracking, voice mimic and luring, and a storage tank, which we can visually see literally contains a child. Although by reading the features on each animatronic, we can actually figure out what occurs at each party, and how all the Funtimes work together. Ballora and Funtime Foxy are specifically focused on luring the children using parental voice sync and replay, variable scent release, deter and misdirect remote activation, etc. While Funtime Freddy has parental tracking and proximity sensor / grouping coordination to further split the children and know whether there's a parent alongside them or not, deciding when they can capture. Once a child is successfully on their own, specifically either Circus Baby, luring them in further with her ice cream dispenser, or Funtime Freddy, luring them in with further voice mimicking, will then capture said child who will remain in their stomach hatches until further notice. But why are they capturing and not simply murdering? What happens to those kids? Well, on the second night's breaker room map, we can actually see that this bunker is specifically connected to observations of the Afton house that was shown off in the FNAF 4 minigames and gameplay, although not being the real Afton house itself, and instead underground recreations as shown with the map having the observations be a different transparency to the rest of the building, implying that it's simply on a different level but the same building, not requiring an elevator, none of the recreations even connected to said elevator, yet still being directly attached to it through hidden hallways place as shown and also directly explained in the Tales from the Pizzaplex short story Didophobia. Within said story, we specifically read about an experiment victim within the recreated bedroom, who finds his way through a concrete corridor all the way into William's private office that we see in the game. This reiterating the map itself, showcasing the bedroom specifically being connected to the private office. Although why on earth does William have underground recreations of these bedrooms and threadbares that he's then capturing kids to then observe and experiment on within? Well, later on in the game we can actually enter William's private office itself and tap into the keypad connected to the cameras 1983, where we then see camera feeds of said recreations, the date implying that they have something to do with the crying child. Although that's not all we see, as right next to those cameras, holding a 16 camera remote, directly mirroring the 16 frames shown in the FNAF 4 minigames, is the infamous Fredbear plush. Cross-referencing this with the fact that Didophobia has the victim outright read through William's clipboard stating, "Subject continues to react with fear to what he perceives to be creatures. Fear level 9. And the story then stating the whole thing was a nasty experiment designed to study the effects on ongoing fear in children. It seems confirmed that William was experimenting with fear and using these rooms and also hallucinogenic gases, according to the short story, to help recreate the life that the crying child had in order to generate his extreme levels of fear specifically. He increases their fears by placing the experiment victim in their starting positions, what the white dots are on the map, something Scott uses for the U player markers in the previous games, and then using hallucinogenic gases to make the victim believe that what are truly mannequins moving around on rails are instead nightmare versions of the animatronic characters, the grey dots on the map. Some believe this story to first be explaining FNAF 4, as in it's just an experiment and not a nightmare from Mike, although not only did we explain why that's not the case in the previous video, but all the experiment connections, as well as the victim's literal travel through Circus babies, tells us that it's actually explaining the experiment chambers instead. But why is he doing these fear-based experiments? Well, as we established in the last video, William is likely the final speaker in the minigames, pretending to be the Fredbear plush, which we also established was haunted by agony from the crying child and his fears, telling the crying child, "I will put you back together." So I theorized that this operation is William attempting to do so, trying to recreate the fears and agony that the crying child had to try and understand how the plushie became haunted, trying to learn about the supernatural to help put his son back together. This makes sense of why the experiment is specifically focused on fears, aka agony, and not general possession of robots, aka remnant, and also why there's canonically a Freddy plushie on the victim's bed, just like the Fredbear plushie that was on the crying child's bed. He's trying to recreate what occurred with the plushie specifically. This is then further hinted at within the novel trilogy. As we established last video, Henry pouring his agony into the Ella doll and bringing it to life is a parallel to the crying child pouring his agony into the Fredbear plush, and also bringing it to life, which is interesting considering Circus Baby is directly connected to said experiments in the book, just like the games, and states, "I gave myself to him, to study, to use, to learn the secrets of my creation, and still it is you he wants. You maybe he can recreate. Henry somehow got a piece of himself into you, and that's something we haven't seen before. That's unique," which sounds exactly like what we're stating here, that William wants to learn the secrets of not just the supernatural, but specifically on how emotion, and therefore a piece of a soul, was able to be put into something. There a doll, here a plush, to then possibly learn to recreate it for whatever he wants. Maybe even immortality within robots like the novels imply, by putting pieces of himself into everything. Although that's not the only purpose that these Funtimes have, as we slowly learn throughout the game that Circus Baby is actually possessed. We know this because at the start of each night we hear the daughter of William, who we learn in the following game is named Elizabeth, asked to go and see Circus Baby while at one of the testing days for the original restaurant, Circus Baby's Pizza World. And as a quick side note, Pizza World was an actual above ground local establishment, just like a Fredbear's or a Freddy's building, that is never seen in game. Meanwhile, Entertainment and Rentals, where we actually are in-game, is the underground establishment that seems to be specifically for potential clients to come down and decide whether they'll end up renting the animatronics for their parties or not, as well as which ones, making sense of why HandUnit calls the rooms in the building showrooms, which are also called either a gallery or an auditorium on the building's blueprints too. Didophobia also hints at this with there being hallways we never see in-game that directly leads to the different rooms, as in unlikely for the customers, instead of relying on the vent system that are seemingly just for the technicians, such as Mike in the gameplay. But within Pizza World, and after cross-referencing Elizabeth's voice lines with a secret 8-bit minigame, we learn that William doesn't let Elizabeth go and see Baby, since unknowingly to her she was a capturing machine. Although when he isn't watching, she sneaks away and goes to Circus Baby on her own, as the other kids party in the other room. Since the Funtimes were created to capture when a child was alone, the protocol then activates and she dispenses ice cream, luring Elizabeth closer to then capture her discreetly. Due to the newspaper revealed before the game's release, William likely notices that either Elizabeth was missing or was simply checking if they've captured anyone, to which he finds Elizabeth dead inside and cancels the grand opening of the establishment, blaming it on gas leaks to the public, which is a horrific reference to Elizabeth losing oxygen while captured inside. After this event, Circus Baby's blue eyes, as seen in the 8-bit minigame, then turned green due to her newfound possession by Elizabeth, who had green eyes. While he cancelled the opening due to the death of his daughter, of course, saying that plainly would be giving him too much credit as a father, because we also just established that the Funtimes are exclusively made for capturing and the experiments, meaning Elizabeth dying inside Baby meant that something was wrong with the capturing technology, meaning the Funtimes needed to be worked on for longer and modified so things run smoothly in the future. This being the main reason for the closure is then directly referenced with the cancelled newspaper itself, stating, "There was only a handful of people that ever got to look inside, kids from here and there, making sure everything worked right, you know. I guess they weren't quite as ready as they thought they were," referencing to us who really know what's going on, that the capturing technology was not as ready as William thought, leading the location to never open and the momentary break between it and the latter location. But Baby aside, and what about the other Funtime animatronics? Are any of them possessed? Well, to answer that, we need to actually look through the whole game first so we're on the same page. So let's do so. As I mentioned earlier, you complete various tasks throughout your 5 nights at the location, with HandUnit as your guide, being an artificial intelligence system whose voice was seemingly taken from a real human being, who used to work for Fazbear Entertainment judging by Secret of the Mimic, there being a similar guide character. Something else to note is that later in the game when HandUnit is in angsty teen mode, after shocking Ballora we hear this random garble here. After being sped up and pitch shifted, we hear this.
Argumentative, stair limits, elevation, passive, heights.
Which seems like an extremely random Easter egg. So what does it mean? Well, unfortunately not much, because by taking the first letter of each of these words we get ASEPH, being an anagram of phase, aka the current voice mode of HandUnit that begins glitching here is literally of a teen's angsty phase, a joke on it's just a phase. Although HandUnit aside, Circus Baby also takes control of the situation, and guides Mike every now and then too, leading him to eventually be stuck in a Springlock suit for the 4th night. And speaking of, there's been a ton of theories on who the Springlock suit is, and there's honestly no real definitive answer, as the design of the face just doesn't match literally anyone we've seen in the series. Although I do have a proposal for who it might be, coming from the Fazbear Fright story Room for One More. In the short story, the protagonist Stanley works as the night guard in an underground facility where a mini Rena appears, says "take me home with you," before disappearing when he wakes up. Each night he's then been falling asleep on his desk into nightmares of the Funtime animatronics attacking him, before he wakes up with his body feeling more numb. One night he wakes up only to discover a mini Rena mid-crawling into his mouth, asking isn't there room for just one more, revealing that all the disappearing mini Renas had been climbing inside of his body. The interesting detail from this story though is that he dreams of 4 different animatronics that he's never seen before: Funtime Foxy, Funtime Freddy, Ballora, and finally a larger regular animatronic sized version of a mini Rena, this specifically being the 4th Funtime infected dream that Stanley has, that larger mini Rena also being the 4th character he meets in said nightmares too. And wait, what night do we encounter the Springlock suit? That's right, night 4. So what if the Springlock suit we see in Sister Location is actually a Springlock version of the character that later, after the Springlock suits get discontinued, becomes the mini Rena design? Think about it. It would explain the giant eyes and smiling mouth that look reminiscent of the doll designed figures like the mini arenas or the puppet. It would explain why this suit was planned for Circus Baby's Pizza World specifically, as said by Baby, it being one of their characters, and it would also make it quite ironic that your enemy while within this earlier Springlock big arena is then the newer doll mini arenas. This theory then becomes way more likely when considering the upcoming Scott-approved FNAF guessing game, Freddy or Not, which features a new illustration of the Springlock suit that makes its visual similarities to the mini arenas more obvious than it already was, by simply seeing the mask from the outside. Although speaking of all the connections to the number 4, do you remember what happens in FNAF 3 on night 4? Well, we hear this phone call.
After learning of an unfortunate incident at the sister location involving multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures, the company has deemed the suit temporarily unfit for employees.
Something we never really had a solid answer for in the previous videos. Although the fact that this game is literally titled Sister Location seems to directly confirm that we're getting the answer to where the sister location was where a Springlock incident occurred, Circus Baby's Pizza World, making the suit it occurred in the big arena, which is not only shown in night 4, the same night we heard about the incident in FNAF 3, but also the suit Baby mentions.
I don't think it was ever used. At least not the way it was meant to be used. Too dangerous.
Directly referencing this very event, causing the suits to be deemed too dangerous for employees and banned from here on out. This is why the identity of the suit doesn't actually matter too much, and why it's not revealed. What's actually important about the suit is the fact that it's a Springlock suit, and that it was involved in an accident. Although back into the gameplay, after seeing that the Funtimes have killed the 2 technicians we heard yesterday, once all the Funtimes have been scooped and come together as one endoskeleton amalgamation named Enid, either you trust Baby and head inside the scooping room only to get scooped yourself, or you don't trust her and head into William's private office, only to fight against Enid, both leading to the same outcome, of Enid escaping the facility in some way, the canon ending having him use Mike's body to successfully do so. We then see the aftermath of this through the 8-bit cutscenes shown off after beating each of the custom night challenges, where his body slowly decomposes over time, and becomes literally purple, instead of his father William, whose purple is simply representing him being in the shadows due to the background of the minigames being black, as confirmed by Scott. Although once Mike's body decomposes too much, Enid eventually leaves the body by ejecting itself into the swords to remain hidden. Mike seemingly dies afterwards, but Baby's voice tells him that he won't die, and he rises yet again, alive once more, which we'll talk more about in just a moment. As we'll expand upon more in the next video, Enid then separates from Baby and becomes Molten Freddy for the following game. So now that we have all the information this game provides on hand, back to our original question. Are the other Funtimes, and therefore Molten Freddy, possessed? Well, in the following game we get an interesting speech from Henry, where we visually see blueprints on screen explaining some of the technology of the series. One of these being the scooper, noting that it's specifically a remnant injector with heat playing a large role, and another blueprint hidden in the files for Molten Freddy, noting that he has the most amount of remnant collectively in its structure. Audibly we then hear Henry state,
"Small souls trapped in prisons of my making, now set to new purpose, and used in ways I never thought imaginable. He lured them all back to a familiar place, back with familiar tricks. He brought them all together. He set some kind of trap. I don't know what it was, but he led them there. Again. He overpowered them. Again. And he robbed them of the only thing that they had. Again. I don't know how those tiny breaths of life came to inhabit those machines, but they will never find rest now. Not like this. I have to call them all back."
Which seemingly mirrors the events of the Follow Me minigames from FNAF 3, where William basically reenacts the MCI, and overpowers the children yet again in the exact same place, considering Henry mentions that those same children were then set to new purpose, and that they won't find rest how they are now. It's implied that the original 5 children are somehow actively a part of the game, which is then reiterated with their gravestones being the final image of the game, cross-referencing this with the Candy Cadet stories, which we'll expand upon more in the following video, being about 5 things becoming one, Molten Freddy specifically only having its right eye lit up, exactly like the 5 classics in the bad ending of FNAF 3 only have their right eyes lit up, signifying a direct connection, the trailer having random children, aka the spirits themselves, state that we don't know what they've been through, and with the future game Help Wanted also having a furnace down in Circus Babies that just happens to contain the endoskeletons of the classics, it seems like the original 5 MCI possessed the Funtimes, and therefore Molten Freddy. by William taking the classics endoskeletons in the Follow Me minigames, explaining why only their suits/shells appear in FNAF 3, with FNAF and Co unable to find any endoskeletons, Afton burning them down in the furnace shown in Help Wanted, turning them into one malleable source of remnant, Dead by Daylight simplifying it as molten metal, that then gets injected into the Funtimes via the scooper. Some may say that this doesn't work with the spirits appearing separately in the final Follow Me minigame, although I believe this can be ruled to be a simple projection of the spirits to William, similar to their abilities showcased in the FNAF movie. But back to the theory, and following FNAF 6's release, this theory then seemingly got confirmed, or at the very least very strongly and heavily implied to be the case, within the final book of the novel trilogy, The Fourth Closet, where within we quite literally read about William taking remnant from the classic animatronic endoskeletons, with heat being the key to it all, melting them together, and then injecting said remnant into the Funtime animatronics to animate them. The ultimate guide then telling us that this book is directly hinting to us how Molten Freddy came to be. Retroactively, this theory was also hinted at with the gameplay of Sister Location itself as well, with Funtime Freddy only appearing in the darkness and trying to sneak up on you just like classic Freddy, even sharing his blue eyes, Funtime Foxy twitching away and being sensitive to bright lights just like Withered Foxy, even sharing his yellow eyes, Ballora being based off audio and listening skills just like classic Chica in both FNAF 1 and Ultimate Custom Night, even sharing her purple eyes, with classic Bonnie represented most clearly with Bon Bon, even sharing his pink eyes, and then of course the secret animatronic Yendo teleporting around and being avoided by flipping up the monitor just like Golden Freddy, represented further with its golden eyes, all directly hinting that the classics are involved in this game in some way. Not only that, but the boss battle against the amalgamation of all the Funtimes is then a literal clone of FNAF 1 itself, with a 12 AM to 6 AM office gameplay, directly referencing the fact that we're facing off against the MCI from FNAF 1 yet again. This theory also explains why the other Funtimes just focus on trying to kill Michael, thinking that he's William, while Baby has her whole get out plan separately. The other Funtimes are all fragments of 5 different souls mixed together, and are unable to think coherently until they're whole via Enid, while Baby is actively possessed by Elizabeth, which is why she has to literally tell Ballora,
He is here to help, Ballora. He is not here to hurt us. Ballora, he is here to help us.
to stop her from just outright killing him. They're two entirely separate forces with different wants and different goals, who got forcibly grouped together, also making sense of why Elizabeth gets eventually kicked out of Enid, to split them up and how they quote outnumber her. She wasn't ever part of the MCI group that have been together for decades, so they want her to get out and go away, so that the 5 can work in unison again with no outer influence. This theory is also the further proof I mentioned back in FNAF 3 that Follow Me takes place after the events of FNAF 1, as the event happening before FNAF 1 would mean that the MCI couldn't be in the classics anymore, and all of these callbacks wouldn't make much sense. Before we move on though, I do want to say that some question whether Golden Freddy is a part of the Funtimes, Enid, Molten Freddy, etc., considering we don't see the Golden Freddy suit destroyed in Follow Me. However, I think that Molten Freddy's design directly referencing the bad ending where we see all 5 of them are indeed destroyed and lit up together, basically making it clear that he was alongside them in itself, said ending screen only appearing after we play as the 5th Golden Freddy spirit in Follow Me, Yendo himself who directly shares the projection-esque supernatural abilities of Golden Freddy, all the references to 5 things becoming one with Candy Cadet, and the fact that the novel trilogy also doesn't mention any parts of Golden Freddy seen in the physical animatronic, despite the Golden Freddy spirit still being with the other 4 spirits. It seems that Golden Freddy was indeed destroyed just off screen, and that regardless, Cassidy is definitely within the Funtimes. But continuing on from the animatronics, and after beating the final custom night challenge, we then receive a speech from Mike himself, leading us to finally address the elephant in the room that we've avoided for long enough for this video. What on earth is Mike doing here? Well, let's go through it.
Father, it's me, Michael.
Immediately confirmed to us that Mike was indeed the son of William after all, which was just a theory at the time, and likely helps explain why he's at each location as we continue with the speech.
I did it. I found it. It was right where you said it would be. They were all there. They didn't recognize me at first, but then they thought I was you.
Directly telling us that William told Mike where the elevator was that leads to the bunker, and also implies that the spirits could have recognized Mike from a previous event, which further reiterates the fact that they're possessed by the same children who possessed the classics in FNAF 1. Even further reiterated with the OST of the scene, featuring the motif of Freddy's Toreador March from the first game too. But continuing and
I found her. I put her back together. just like you asked me to. She's free now.
Directly tells us that William not only sent Mike on this mission, but to also seemingly allow Baby to do what she does in this game to help free her, which, considering we hear about a technician found dead in the vents on night 2, it's possible that William knows what she wants because she might have tried the plan before and failed in some way. Although that still leaves the question, how does Mike put her back together, which apparently frees her? Well, for a while now I've theorized it to come from the fact that the spirits seem to be unable to freely manipulate the machines they possess. The animatronic programming keeping them back and putting them into the states we find them in for the gameplay, explaining their forced restart at 6 AM, being able to be kept back by a music box, not being able to enter the safe rooms despite literally seeing them in Follow Me, etc. This meaning that Elizabeth is being held back and stuck in this body. So when Mike gets her endoskeleton scooped out of said body, and then within Enid, she's finally able to move freely on her own accord, and slowly regain her memories, becoming whole, aka put back together again, no longer held back by any other Baby programming. This explains why Baby states,
I want you to save what is good, so the rest can be destroyed and never recovered.
Right before we specifically let the body be destroyed. I believe this was all further hinting at what we established previously, that an animatronic's endoskeleton / the metal itself is what contains the spirits, while the shells and suits would then simply be containing the programming that keeps them in the state that we see them within the gameplay, which this all also explains why Circus Baby, the machine itself, and Elizabeth, whose soul is possessing the endoskeleton, seem to be separate, with Baby referring to her in third person all game, despite us knowing that they're together as one. The following game then having Scrap Baby, who isn't held back by the animatronic body anymore, finally talking as Elizabeth in first person, now that Mike has freed her from the suit. But back to the speech.
But something is wrong with me. I should be dead, but I'm not. I've been living in shadows.
Puts into question how Mike is even alive again in the first place, once Enid leaves him, which I believe is caused due to Remnant. We briefly mentioned in the first video of the miniseries that Remnant appears to have a healing ability, but how do we know this? Well, while FNAF 6 did imply this was how Mike survived by clarifying that the scooper contained Remnant, we then got the fourth closet, where we specifically read about William injecting a human, Carlton, with a syringe filled with Remnant, causing him to begin bleeding out and William to state, for your sake, you'd better hope my little experiment does something, because I doubt you will survive otherwise. Carlton then has some sort of soul view, and after the events of the story, one of the MCI children, Michael, gives Carlton a drawing that gets placed over his wound, Carlton trying to give it back by saying this is a part of you, before Michael says you'll die without it. The passage ending with, Michael smiled, and the drawing began to fade, hovering where Michael placed it for a last moment before the ghostly image vanished, seeming to sink into Carlton's chest. We then read that Carlton was miraculously saved and stable in hospital. This in itself seems to explain what happens with Mike and Sister Location, him being left to die once Enid escapes before Baby appears to put a piece of herself within him via Remnant, explaining why we literally hear her stating you won't die over and over in his mind, just like MCI Michael states you'll die without it in the novel. We also then read within the short stories from the Fazbear Fright series and Tales from the Pizzaplex series that Remnant can also heal illnesses, as well as again reiterating that it can resurrect the dead, with Frailty's intro having a confirmed dead kid be suddenly brought back to life after the main protagonist scrapes silver off of her pendant, which we know contains Remnant, onto said kid. Continuing with the speech,
There is only one thing left for me to do now. I'm going to come find you. I'm going to come find you.
Then tells us that Mike vows to find his father no matter what, and the result of this goal is then revealed visually, the fire at Fazbear's Fright against Springtrap, which we already established in the FNAF 3 video. Although this moment isn't just setting up where he goes next, but also tells us that Mike's goals are actively shifting. So what were his motivations beforehand? Well, earlier in the video, HandUnit specifically states that Mike is back for another night of
self-reflection on past mistakes.
This being the same game where Mike is able to successfully free one of his siblings, which just happens to be the reverse of his biggest mistake, killing his sibling and breaking his spirit. The two get further connected, with Baby later stating,
I'm broken.
Before Mike is able to put her back together, which directly mirrors the final speaker in FNAF 4 telling the crying child, "You're broken," after the bite and Mike's apology. So it appears that by freeing his sister, he might have felt some sort of relief from his guilt of causing his brother's death. The movie then doubling down on this motivation, with Mike spending his whole life haunted by the guilt of his brother's death, being able to begin to move on from that guilt with the importance of and after saving his sister instead. This would then lead to FNAF 3 and 4, where he's able to conclude his two main motivations through the story, confronting the agony of his brother's death head on via nightmare to finally move on from his guilt, while simultaneously confronting his father who had been manipulating him to do most of the things he does in the story, Sister Location specifically, as we just heard him admit, to then finally break free from his chains. Mike's character arc is then practically completed after beating both, although upon later learning of FNAF 6 he then helps Henry finish the job properly, to end not just William's torment but also everything else connected to it. But before we move on to timelines, something I forgot to mention was that at the end of every one of these shifts, Mike actually goes home to watch the TV soap opera The Immortal and the Restless. To briefly recap, it's about the mother, Clara, arguing with the father, Vlad, about how the baby is indeed his, while he instead dismisses that being true, despite its clear connections to him and obviously being the case. This whole show is weird because it seems to be telling us something, yet seems extremely vague to the point that getting anything solid out of it seems to be impossible. The only real hints we've gotten since its release is that 1, the animator stated that Vlad and Clara's designs don't actually mean anything, since Scott gave absolutely no input on their appearances, meaning their characteristics are more important, and 2, the survival logbook has Mike state that he simply relates to Clara the most due to everything seeming crazy, yet no one seems to notice besides him. So what does it all mean? Well, if we take the survival logbook to mean not only does Mike relate to Clara in-universe, but is meant to be represented by Clara in the meta sense, the story starts to fall into place. Think about it like this. William is of course the evil and dismissive Vlad, hinted at further with the fact that Vlad has the graveyard shift where he didn't get a paycheck, representing FNAF 2 where he worked the midnight shift only to not get a paycheck since he ran away before he could get one, who is continuously discounting the baby who represents Elizabeth, the connection there being quite clear with Circus Baby, getting Clara who represents Mike, as directly hinted at in the logbook, as well as hinted at by burning down William's house on episode 3, as a reference to Mike doing so in FNAF 3, to look after the baby and so deal with all of William's responsibilities instead. The entire show being Vlad denying the baby is his despite the mountains of evidence saying that it is, represents Sister Location's story being William denying that baby is his responsibility, despite the mountains of evidence saying that it is all his responsibility and his fault. Mike is literally coming home after dealing with William's jobs, which considering FNAF 2 and FNAF 1 he's seemingly been doing for years at this point, watching his comfort show that practically represents his frustrations with it all and that he relates to, only to go and do the same thing the next day. This is why the final cutscene where the two characters reconcile is in the fake ending. It's not the real ending for these characters. Mike and William never reconcile after this. The unhealthy cycle doesn't just continue again, as Mike now goes against his father's wishes from this point on, and Mike doesn't canonically leave the facility to stop dealing with the responsibility of baby, which is then clearly represented with Enid literally forcing itself into Mike's house, if he tries to do so. No matter if he wants it or not, it's now all on him. This theory would make sense considering the fact that we wouldn't actually know that William sent Mike here if it weren't for the cutscene we got later on after the game's release that revealed that to be the case. This show would be revealing that connection early. The show's fake ending even hints at this theory by teasing the following game that follows the real ending. What happens to the baby, aka Elizabeth, after this game's events? All we know is that they escape and go living in the sewers. What about William and all his responsibilities? All we know is that he gets burned in FNAF 3 but seems to survive regardless and get away with it all again. Well, stay tuned for the next game for those very answers and more. This theory would also line up with the following games having equally vague and symbolic stories that are all about their specific game's events. Candy Cadet stories in FNAF 6 are all about FNAF 6's story. The cryptic shows in Ultimate Custom Night are about Ultimate Custom Night's story. The mysterious Princess Quest in Help Wanted is about Help Wanted. The fascinating Moon.exe in Secret of the Mimic is about Secret of the Mimic, etc, etc. These cryptic stories are always about the story of the game that they're shown in. However, all of this aside, where do these new events and locations then fit into the timeline? Well, let's start with the earlier establishment, Circus Baby's Pizza World, which as we mentioned earlier was only operational for testing days, and never ended up opening due to Elizabeth's death. Due to the fact that a Springlock suit was in use at Circus Baby's Pizza World, we can immediately solidify that her death occurs prior to the MCI in June 1985, which we know due to the fact that the Springlock suits as a whole were no longer used shortly before the MCI occurs, where it's noticed that
Management has also been made aware that the Spring Bonnie animatronic has been noticeably moved, and would like to remind employees that this costume is not safe to wear under any circumstances.
And so Pizza World having a Springlock suit used that a failure occurs in that causes them all to get banned would directly require the events to take place prior to June 1985. The Springlock incident occurring there would also mean that the events must take place after the Crying Child's death in 1983, where the Fredbear and Spring Bonnie characters, two Springlock suits, are explicitly shown to still be used, and also due to Ralph's phone calls mentioning that they later have the two at Freddy's, meaning the calls all take place after Fredbear's is already shut anyways. This would also make sense with the fact that the experiments are based around the Crying Child's life and death, which obviously means that he's already died, and so the events of the FNAF 4 minigames have already played out for Afton to then begin learning of the supernatural, create the experiment bunker for said research, likely transforming Edwin's underground bunkers as we learn in Secret of the Mimic that Afton steals his land, including his house and the MCM facility with its underground tunnels, and then make the Funtimes to capture the children to be used in those experiments. This means that Circus Baby's Pizza World and therefore the experiment bunker, Elizabeth's death, as well as the Springlock ban, all happened sometime between the Crying Child's death in 1983 and June of 1985, which this is reiterated in the alternate novel timeline too, where we directly read that Elizabeth's death occurs after Charlie's death and before the MCI occurs, her death and possession of Baby specifically being why he goes on to commit the MCI. Quote, "The most terrible accidents bear the most beautiful fruits. Recreating the accident, that is the duty in honor of science, to replicate the experiment and obtain the same results." So, William, knowing that Baby got possessed due to a body being stuffed inside of the animatronic, then causes William to recreate the accident, which Baby does call it in the game.
I know it was an accident.
By killing the 5 MCI children and stuffing them inside of the animatronics, to see if he obtains the same results, which he then does so when the classics become possessed. We can also assume that Elizabeth dies January 7th, 1985, due to the numbers that Baby says that can be heard throughout Sister Location in a random order.
One, 5, 8, 7.
Which I believe can be interpreted to be 7185 for the fellow day month years, or 1785 for you month day years, and gets directly linked to her death through FNAF AR, having the Baby directly from her death minigame, even with the green eyes now, glitch and cause these numbers to appear around her. This seemingly being further hinted at with Elizabeth's death minigame having an OST called Turtle Crusher, a reference to Mario, and specifically Super Mario Bros, where the Koopa Troopers, the turtles, were first introduced, coming out in the year 1985. Elizabeth dying in 1985 alongside the MCI would also make the progression from Elizabeth straight to the MCI more straightforward too, just like Ralph's phone calls imply with the Springlock ban and so all the Circus Baby's Party World stuff happening only one call previous to the call about Spring Bonnie being moved, and so the MCI, as well as the novel trilogy implies. This timeline of events is even hinted at with an incredibly obscure Easter egg in the game that you probably didn't even know about. On night 2, by heading into Blora's gallery and holding down the 1 and O keys for 1 minute and 23 seconds, you get sent to a blue screen of death. That is until you click 1, and suddenly you see all these random numbers generating that will literally go on forever. What does this mean? Well, the time it takes to get sent to the blue screen, converted into seconds, just happens to be 83 seconds. Several people have gone into the game's files and come out saying that they're all continuously randomly generated, and therefore there's genuinely nothing to decode. Although they also discovered that Baby's 1587 is coded to play in the frame as well. So it appears to be another hint prior prior to discovering William's private office, which outright confirms it, that the Byte of 83 is the reason for the literal creation of all of these systems, with the randomly generated numbers possibly representing Baby's programming specifically, counting the people in the parties, as you just happen to access it after inputting 1. aka only counting one child in our proximity, which causes Baby to repeat the numbers that are directly correlated to Elizabeth's death, which we all know occurs once there's only one child in our proximity. But either way, and after the MCI proves his successes, he then seemingly continues to experiment through the years, trying to learn the secrets of agony specifically, which seems to be an entirely different supernatural process to a regular possession, that causes him in the novel timeline to continue hunting for Charlie, despite all of his supernatural successes already. But regardless, and Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals then opens up after a Freddy's closure as confirmed by HandUnit. Quote,
"Due to the massive success, and even more so the unfortunate closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, it was clear that the stage was set, no pun intended, for another contender in children's entertainment."
When talking about the rentals location, but which Freddy's? Being completely honest, there is no clear answer, and it doesn't really change much since the business mainly runs in the background until we go through the events of Sister Location. Although I would personally place it after the closure of the 1993 Freddy's, when the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza franchise itself is over and done with, therefore leaving a gap in the children's entertainment market for a new franchise, similar to FNAF 3 where it mentions Freddy's closing its doors, which also ended up meaning after FNAF 1. Either way, and the experiments then run automatically through the years. Yes, years. Although likely after no real success, he decides to go and do Follow Me, where he destroys the classics to experiment on soul transference, taking souls from the classics and putting them into the Funtimes. It's likely here, as we established in the FNAF 3 video 2015, that William then gets springlocked, causing Mike, either from not hearing from his father and being suspicious on what happened, or being told due to a failsafe of some sort, to be instructed to head down to entertainment and rentals, and sort the rest out himself. The experiment's left abandoned, which is why you can hear a gut sound effect within Baby on night 5. There is literally a body inside that wasn't able to be taken out due to William, the only one who knew of these capturing features being MIA. This is then when the gameplay of Sister Location takes place, and fellow FNAF theorist T-Dreads also noticed that the schedule created from the source code leading up to the game actually shares similarities to the gameplay itself, this being how we were meant to solve which Funtime F is which, the similarities creating the schedule. Day 1, Wednesday, Baby, Ballora, and Funtime Foxy are rented out to parties. Night 1, Baby, Ballora, and Funtime Foxy all require shocks. Day 2, Thursday, all 4 animatronics are rented out to parties. Night 2, once again, Baby, Ballora, and Funtime Foxy require shocks, but Mike seemingly forgets to shock Freddy when he should have, since he also went out that day, causing him to assumedly tamper with the power, explaining the random power malfunction on only this night. Day 3, Friday, Ballora and Funtime Foxy are the only 2 rented out to parties. Night 3, Mike is told that he didn't do his job properly yesterday, since this theory would mean that he didn't shock Freddy when he was meant to, with no other proposed reasoning for HandUnit's note about his performance issues the previous night, causing us to perform maintenance on him. We then shock Ballora and Funtime Foxy while HandUnit tells us that Baby doesn't need one today, as she wasn't rented out. The night ends being jump scared by Funtime Foxy. Day 4, Saturday, Baby and Ballora are sent to a mysterious private party, while Funtime Foxy and Funtime Freddy are both in maintenance and unavailable, which we can imply from the following nights means scooped. Night 4, we only see Baby and Ballora, where due to something different happening that day, as the schedule would confirm, Ballora gets sent to the scooping room. Day 5, Sunday, all 4 are in maintenance. Night 5, we see that all 4 are scooped, and we can also hear that after
Something bad happened yesterday. I don't want it to happen again.
Baby now has a gut sound effect coming from her stomach. She captured someone at the private party, explaining why she says she wants to get rid of the body, the capturing machine, while still saving what is good, aka Elizabeth, who possesses the metal. The animatronics then escape through Mike that Sunday night / Monday morning, and if we assume that the custom night minigames are happening per day, they would then begin on Monday, and so Enid would be leaving his body on Sunday, Mike being revived after a week of outright being dead, similar to William waking up and having a heartbeat again, as heard in FNAF 6, after spending years completely dead. Mike then sets out on his new goal to find William, doing so in FNAF 3, finally moving on from his guilt surrounding his brother's death in FNAF 4, and then heading towards his, as well as the Funtimes, final conclusion within FNAF 6. So after all of that, we can solidify for my final timeline that besides what we're directly told / shown, Afton Robotics and the entire Circus Babies franchise is a subsidiary of Fazbear Entertainment. Funtime Chica is the out-of-service animatronic leading up to the game. William is using the kidnapped kids to experiment on fear in order to research the supernatural, specifically the concept of agony and emotion, that the reason Elizabeth died was due to the capturing systems being faulty as no one is actually meant to die inside of them, that the Springlock suit is a larger ballerina character who looks similar to the mini-Renas, so Big Rena, that Big Rena is the same Springlock suit mentioned back in FNAF 3 that caused the Springlocks to get banned, that the Funtimes are possessed by the same 5 MCI children that possessed the classics, William was collecting their endoskeletons for Remnant in Follow Me, that Golden Freddy was also destroyed in Follow Me, just off screen, that spirits cannot override the programming of the body they inhabit, that Remnant was what healed and revived Mike, that Mike's motivations in the story is dealing with the guilt surrounding his brother's death as well as the manipulation from his father, that the Immortal and the Restless shows William represented by Vlad, Mike represented by Clara, and Elizabeth and the concept of responsibility represented by Baby, that Elizabeth died January 7th, 1985, that her death directly causes the MCI as an attempt to recreate the accident, that Sister Location then occurs after FNAF 1 and Follow Me but before FNAF 3, and that the schedule created in the teasers leading up to the game showcased the week of the game itself. So with every aspect of FNAF Sister Location answered, we can now move on to FNAF 6 Pizzeria Simulator to try and solve everything within it. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. A big shout out to all my channel members, become one today. Please be respectful to everyone when discussing what are simply theories, and I really hope you all enjoyed and have a great day / night. Bye!